Hello again. So welcome back. Today, our second video, we'll be looking at inflation, and we'll try to understand how inflation is calculated, where it comes from, what it is, and by the end of the session, you should be able to calculate a price index and define inflation. You can see in the problems that follow this video that I've asked you to, in fact, do that. So please pay close attention as to how we go about calculating a price index and calculating the value of a basket of so-called goods. So let's get started. Let's dive right in to this session. So inflation looks at a lot of things, primarily the rise of prices, but we'll see touches other areas of the economy as well. If we take a look back to 1960, so this was even before I was born, and that's a long time ago. Charles de Gaulle was president of France. France had just undergone the creation of a new franc. The franc was the measure of currency. Because of inflationary pressures. In fact, the prices of goods had gone up a lot, and so we were measuring the prices in large number of francs. And so they made a major economic decision. They divided the prices by 100, and they produced the new French franc. And by that time, we started to pay for the tollway. The autoroute we started to pay for the first time to drive, something we still do today. What else was going on in life back then? You could buy a baguette for about 7 centimes of a euro. A car, 2 chevaux, a 2CV car, very popular with young people. The price was about 730 euros. Movie tickets, 28 cents to see the movie. Liter of gas cost about 16 cents. And what else do we have here? Wages, if I recall, were pretty low at the time relative to today, obviously, but about 25 cents per hour. So some of you are probably thinking, wow, wouldn't it be great to live back in 1960? But as we can see, 1960 also meant you were making 25 cents an hour. So I sincerely hope things were not as expensive as they are today. So let's go on. Let's take a look at the future, shall we? So what's the future hold? 2010, quite a few years later. Exactly 50 years later, Nicolas Sarkozy is president of France. And not surprising, something we have even today, large strikes, union strikes about retirement pension reform plans. So what happened to our prices? Well, the baguette is now 83 cents. A car, the lowest price car, the Dacia Logan, 7,600 euros. Movie ticket cost a little bit more than 10 euros to go see a movie. A liter of gas was 1.42 euros, and the wage went up to 8.86 euros, the minimum wage, per hour. So, what changed? And did it really matter? Well, what do we see? We see the prices went up. In fact, the price of the baguette multiplied by 12. The price of a car went up by almost 11 times what it was. The price of movies went up 36 times what they were. The price of a liter of gas was multiplied by 9. But your wages, the minimum wage, also went up by a factor of 35. So, are we better off or worse off? Well, if you're a minimum wage earner, probably better off, because your wage went up by a ratio of 35, and the only thing that went up that much was the price of a movie ticket. And as time and as things evolved, the prices of cars actually were decreasing. We have new technologies that allow us to make lower price cars. Price of gas went up, but not that much. We could probably assume that the wages were relatively low at the time. But what we're seeing here is that the impact of inflation, the fact that prices go up, really depends upon if the wages go up. I mean, if your wages and salaries rise at the same time and at the same rate that prices go up, the impact that we have on the economy is not as bad as some people think. So prices just measure things. And we see that in this example. So inflation is the general and ongoing rise in the level of prices in an entire economy. It's important to bear in mind that inflation does not refer to an increase in relative prices. So the price of, for example, a baguette relative to the price of a car. We're looking at the general price level. And overall, in market economies, we see that prices tend to rise over time. And this is what we've seen in the last example. Some prices do rise faster than others, and later on I'll show you some examples of how prices in certain items like tobacco rise faster than other items. Maybe electricity and gas prices can rise fast, and we see that recently. So we don't capture everything in a general measure of inflation. We do see differential increases of prices. But having this general approach allows us to get sort of an idea about what's happening in the macroeconomy. And so we need to have a general idea of our prices rising. Can we answer the question, are prices rising in general? Well, to do this, economists need something to measure all the prices. We can't go out and count all the prices of goods and services. We can't easily do that. So what we'll do, and what economists do in most developed economies, we'll determine a basket of goods and services. This is what the average person in the country purchases, and we'll call it a basket of goods. And then we'll look at, well, how much does that basket of goods and services cost? How much are we paying to buy those goods and services? And are we paying more or less than in the past? And this will allow us to measure inflation. So a basket of typically purchased goods is defined in France by the French economic authorities. And in France, that basket, obviously it's a basket that is not really purchased. It represents a large amount of goods and services. And in fact, in France, we include about 1,000 different products. Now, they won't tell you what those products are. It's very confidential information. But we're about 1,000. Those 1,000 products cover about 95% of typical household purchases when you look at all households across France. You know, obviously some households buy different products than others, but if you take those 1,000 products, we're getting a pretty good idea of the average household. And when we look at the basket of goods and services, we will obviously weight the different items to reflect the importance in our overall budget over time. I mean, if you say, okay, I'll buy in the basket of goods, I'll take the price of a baguette, I'll take the price of I don't know, let's say eggs, and I'll take the price of a jewelry. I don't know. Well, we don't buy jewelry all the time. It's not important for us in our budget. We buy it now and then, but certain food items, we tend to buy a lot of it. So we're going to weight them accordingly because it reflects a bigger part of our budget over time. So let's take an example, and we're gonna calculate the inflation using a basket of goods that I've chosen here for a student. So I've kind of got an idea here of a typical student. So let's go back here. What we'll do is we'll we'll calculate this, and we'll see if we can make this work. All right, so what we've got here is we've got this is our basket right here. We've defined a basket of goods and services to include 20 hamburgers, 1 bottle of aspirin that students will definitely need after preparing for an exam, and 5 movie tickets to enjoy the weekend, I hope. So first thing we want to know is we want to calculate, well, how much does this basket of goods cost? And we're going to use this same basket of goods and services every year. We're going to fix this 20 hamburgers, 1 bottle of aspirin, and 5 movie tickets. And we're going to ask ourselves, how much does that basket cost every year? So let's see how much we spent. If in 2017 hamburgers cost 6, we buy 20, well, we bought for 120 euros of hamburgers. Bottle of aspirin was 3 euros, and movie tickets we buy 5 at 5 euros each. That's 25 euros. So we've spent, unless I've done my math wrong, about 148 euros for the basket. Let's go on to 2018. In 2018, we can see that the price of hamburgers have gone up. The price of aspirin has gone up. Or no, it stayed the same. And the price of movie tickets has gone up just a little bit. But what about our basket of goods and services? So we're at 650. We're buying 20, so we're at 120 plus another 50 cents for every 20. So that gives us a total of 130 euros spent on hamburgers. We're still spending our 3 euros on our bottle of aspirin that we so desperately need. And now we've got 10 cents more for our 5 movie tickets. So we've spent $25.50, if I'm not mistaken, for our basket of goods and services. So now, what have we paid? We've gone up to 133.25. So we're looking at, let's see if I can do this calculation, about 158.50, if I'm not too far off. And our last year, in 2019, prices gone up quite a bit here. $7.10, and we're going to buy 20 hamburgers. So we've got 140 plus, let's see, 2, so we're at 142 euros. Let's see what else. We've got 3 euros still. We haven't changed. Our bottle of aspirin, thank God, hasn't gone up. And our price of movie tickets has gone up to 5.20. That gives us 26 euros total. So what have we spent? We've spent 6, 9, 11, carry the 1, 6, 7, 171 euros. So we can see that the basket of goods and services has cost more every year. And so prices on general are rising, the price of this basket of goods. Now, to calculate inflation, it's relatively simple. We're going to ask, well, what is the percentage change as we move from 148 to 158.50? And to calculate that, well, we can do it by hand. We can also just pull out a calculator. So let's do that. So we've got 158.50, and the previous price was 148. So we've got a 7% increase in prices. So we can note that. So our inflation rate here is about 7%. And let's go back to our trusty calculator again. And now we want to know what's the percentage change in prices from 2018 to 2019. And again, we'll use our calculator to do that. Let's see if I can get it over here. 171 divided by 158.50. 5 gives us about 8%. So we're at about an 8% increase in prices or inflation rate for 2019. Let's see if I got that right. So we can come back here. We'll go on to the next item. Turn this off. We'll see if my calculator is right. Yes, I did it right. I'm so happy with myself. I did the math. And so, as we see here, the inflation rate has gone up because we see the price, the amount we spend on that basket of goods and services has gone from 148 to 158.50 to 171. And we've calculated the percentage change in how much we spend for that basket of goods from one year to the next. Let's move on. Now, to do this also, we often use what's called an index. And you may have heard of this. You may have heard of the Consumer Price Index or the Producer Price Index. And these are indices. And economists like working in indices. They're easy to calculate in terms of inflation. And so we use an index instead of actually reporting the actual amount spent. Because to be quite honest, if we were reporting the actual amount spent, we'd be looking at millions of euros probably. It'd just be a huge number to do the calculation on. So we try to simplify things by creating an index. And to do that, we have to select what's called a base year. The base year here is, and this is exactly what you see in this text here, is that a base year is defined as 100. It's a year that's fixed. We usually fix a base year as a year that ends in 0. So 2000, 2010, 2020 are typical base years. And what's nice about an index number is it's unit free. It means we're not talking about euros or dollars or anything like that. We're going to produce an index that has no currency sign attached to it. So how do we go about doing that? Well, if we go back to our previous example, we've got the amount that we've calculated. We know this is how much we spent. Right here, right here, and right here. And to calculate the index, we're going to first choose our base year. So let's say our base year is 2017. So we're going to choose our base year as 2017. And that means what we're going to do is we're going to take the amount we spend every year, here, here, and here. And we're going to divide it by that amount in the base year. So the index here is going to be quite simple. It's going to be 148 divided by 148, the amount in the base year, times 100. Well, that's just 1 times 100. That's going to equal 100. Here, what are we going to do? We're going to do the same thing. We've got 158.50. We're going to divide it by the value in the base year, 148. And we're going to multiply that all by 100. And here again, we've got 171. We divide by 148. And we multiply by 100. So let's bring in our trusty calculator again and see what this gives us. We have 158.50 divided by 148. And that equals, yes, 107, because we multiply by 100. And if we take it, our last one, we have 171 divided by 148. And that gives us 115.1116. Now, to calculate inflation, well, we've moved from 100 to 107. That's pretty easy. We've gone up 7%. And as we move from 107 to 116, how much have we gone up? Well, again, let's do the calculation. 116 divided by 107. 8%. Not a surprise because we've already calculated that in the previous way of calculating the inflation rate. So we got 8%. Now you can see the obvious benefit of using an index is that when we're in the base year, as we move from the base year to the next year, we can see immediately that it's just the movement from 100 to whatever the value is of the index. So that's the consumer price index, and we've chosen a base year of 2017. Now you can do it another way. You can choose a base year of 2018. You'd be divided by this value here at 158.50. Okay, so let's see if I've not screwed this up entirely. So we'll see if my math has paid off, and yes, it has. We come up with our 107 and 116 value that I've had back here. So we've taken inflation, we've calculated for a basket of goods and services. We've created an index, a consumer price index, using these three simple values, and we've also weighted them by the quantity, obviously. The consumer price index is thus a measure of inflation that we use as economists to measure inflation, and it represents the average consumer's purchases. In France, we refer to it as the IPC, Indice de Prix de la Consommation. And there's two things that you need to keep in mind, is that this consumer price index can overestimate inflation. The actual inflation that we feel as consumers may be much less than what this is telling us. So why do you think it's less? I mean, what are some potential reasons? Well, let me try to explain that to you very quickly. The first reason is that as the price of a good increases, what do you do? Well, if the price rises of a product that's in that basket that's been defined by the statisticians, and we don't like changing the basket from year to year. If we change what's in the basket, we can't really measure inflation. So we fix the basket, prices go up of one of the products in the basket. What do? Well, you'll buy something else. You'll change the basket. You know, if the price of Coke goes up or cola goes up in general, well, you'll stop buying cola and start buying, I don't know, lemonade. So we move away from the more expensive goods, and we substitute away from them, and we buy less expensive goods. But the price index still looks at the price of Coke, even though nobody buys Coke anymore. So it's telling us that, oh, prices are going up, but in fact, well, not really for us, because we're not buying Coke, we're buying lemonade. So that's the first way that this is an overestimate of really what we feel as consumers. The second is a product quality bias. Now, what happens over time is that prices rise, and we've seen this already. But we can also note that over time, the quality of goods goes up. When you have a phone prices are rising, but the features you have in your phone are also getting better. So product quality can rise, and as product quality rises, prices are getting higher as well. So we're paying more, but we're getting more benefit. It's not really the same product. Yeah, I mean, we're buying, you know, a box of cereal, maybe, or a box of juice, but maybe the juice has got more pulp in it, or maybe we have a better way of producing juice, or it's a better taste, or something. But over time, if prices are rising, maybe we're getting more for our money. And again, the price index will say, "Ooh, inflation is going up," but we're getting more for it. So it's overestimating really the impact of price changes. So those are two very simple ways to see that the price index is not always a great reflection of inflation impact on people, and it will overestimate price rises. Now again, as I mentioned, we tend not to change what's in the consumer price index, the basket of goods. It can be adjusted now and then, but we don't like changing it because it screws up our measurement of inflation over time. So let's go on to the next item. This is the release of what's called the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices by the European Union. So the European Union fixes a way of measuring their price index, the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices, across all European countries, so we can compare the inflation rates from one country to the next. And it's not a surprise that there are certain weights, and I mentioned this to you before, is that we want to consider some goods as being more important in our overall price index, because it's something we do a lot of. And so you can see here that in January, specifically in January, if you look this number up on Eurostat, they will give you the weights for the year. And here we have the weights for 2020. Well, what are the weights and what does it represent? Well, we can see right away that alcohol and processed foods represent about 15%, unprocessed foods about 4%, energy is about 10%, industrial goods 26%, and no surprise here, services represent 45% of the Harmonized Index of Consumer Prices in European countries today. So this is a nice statistic to get your hands on if you ever want to know, again, well, what goes in it and what's the weight of goods. Always look for the January release, and this is released monthly by Eurostat. Other indexes exist for prices. Obviously, we're not all consumers. Some of us are producing goods and services, so we can use the producer price index. This is looking at the change in prices of products sold as they leave the producer, and this allows us to understand, well, prices along the production process and value chain. We've seen in the past in class that the GDP deflator can be used, and it's defined by the ratio between nominal and real GDP. So it's good, but it includes goods and services that are not bought by households. I mean, the GDP deflator is the ratio of nominal to real GDP, and, well, GDP is the value of production of all goods and services in the economy. And that goes way beyond what households buy. And if we're interested in the household inflation and prices, well, the CPI is really the best indicator today for household purchases. We can also get specific indices. As I've told you before, some prices in the economy go up faster than others. Housing prices, for example, have been going up, and so we have a housing price index. We can also look at utility price indices. Here are some examples. If you go to the website franceinflation.com over here, you get an indicator. You can look at these, and this is, you can see prices of the general price level here is represented by the blue rectangles. Tobacco prices exploding. Obviously, this is not this is a sin good, if you will, and so we try to discourage the consumption of tobacco. We can see inflation is 425%. Services going up a little bit more than the basket if we just look at the services, and because we've included services in our index as well as other goods, if we look at the manufacturing products, well, we know it's a smaller weight overall, so our average is going to be closer to services than the industrial produced goods and services. Food prices here tracking the general price index. And obviously energy prices quite high, sometimes going down. This is linked to obviously the cost of crude oil, in some cases gas, cost of producing electricity, and this is changing day to day as we and changing all the time as we adopt better energy production methods. Over time, been some surprising things with inflation over time. We can actually have deflation. Deflation is a period when prices are falling in an economy. It does exist. We know that if we go into a recession, we can have a decrease in economic activity. As demand decreases in an economy, prices will fall. We can also have periods of negative inflation, or we can actually have periods of inflation and decreased production in the economy. But we can easily have a decrease in prices, and that's deflation, exact opposite. And we also have periods of hyperinflation. And a very interesting example of hyperinflation would be that of Venezuela, where the price of a cup of delicious Venezuelan coffee rose recently, rising by about 9,000%. So what's happening? And you can actually look this up at the Venezuela Coffee con Leche Index from Bloomberg, which is quite interesting. So what happened in Venezuela? Well, Venezuela is a country in a lot of trouble right now in terms of many items, but inflation, and that's not good for its consumers. The government of Venezuela subsidized payments to citizens to have a better life and whatnot, and these were financed from oil revenues, as Venezuela is an oil-rich nation. Well, at one time in the past, in the near past, price of oil started to drop. And as the price of oil dropped in the markets, nobody needed to have Venezuelan bolivars to buy the Venezuelan oil. So if you're going and you're saying, hey, I want to buy oil, and the price of oil drops, well, you need fewer bolivar to buy the oil from Venezuela because you're buying less oil. So as the price of the oil dropped, we needed less bolivars, and so the demand for bolivars decreased. Now, as we don't need as many, and so the price of the bolivar dropped. And well, what does this mean? That means as the price of the bolivar dropped, for anybody living in Venezuela, the price of imported goods went up. So yeah, I can get more bolivars for €1, but that means I get fewer euros for 1 bolivar. And if the Venezuelan people want to buy European goods, well, they're going to pay more and more bolivars to get them. To answer this problem, the cost of imported goods rising because, well, the price of the bolivar has dropped. The government decided to print money, which is a way to give people more money to buy the imported goods that are more expensive. But you create another problem, is that, well, you have a bunch more money in the economy. And as there's more money floating around, well, if I know that everybody has more money in their pocket and I am producing and selling goods in Venezuela, if I know my consumers all have more money, well, I will probably increase my prices. And that's exactly what happened. And prices started to rise for local goods and services. Oil prices continued to fall, and the thing just kept going. And as time went on, foreign investors started to get out of Venezuela. Prices continued to rise even more. The government continued to respond by printing even more money. Consumers eventually were restricted from buying foreign currency because this was a way they felt they could stop this process of out of control inflation. Well, it just created a secondary market, a black market for foreign currency. making matters even worse. So it's been a bad time for Venezuela. And through this very simple example of hyperinflation, you can see the difficulties it causes on society. You literally have people walking around with tons and tons of paper in the form of the money that's in the form of paper. The paper money is worthless. In fact, it's more valuable and it's a better use than buying toilet paper. It's better to use, in some cases, the Bolivar printed bill as toilet paper rather than buying a roll of toilet paper. It's less expensive. Problems with inflation. Well, what's the problem? We have inflation. Suppose our wages keep up. Yeah, we can live with inflation. There'll be menu costs. Menu costs are the costs of changing prices. Literally, if you go to a restaurant and prices are rising all the time, you can imagine that you have to destroy the menu, you have to change the prices, you have a lot of things you have to physically change over time. And this is a cost in terms of time spent reprinting documents, things like that. But overall, if wages keep up, we should be okay. And this is why we look at the real wage rate and not the nominal wage rate. But what happens if they don't keep up? Well, we can have problems. And some of the problems could be in situations where you're holding a lot of cash. Imagine that you have cash stuffed under your bed and it's not in the bank, or it's in the bank in a checking account. Prices can rise, and as prices rise, the money you've stuffed under your mattress or kept in your cash account can buy fewer and fewer goods. So holding cash during times of high inflation is not a great idea. If you have financial investments where the nominal return does not keep up with inflation, imagine you've purchased or you've invested in an investment, maybe a bond, that gives a fixed rate of return over a period of time. And again, as inflation rises, your real rate of interest would be the nominal rate less inflation, so the rate you make is getting smaller and smaller. You're earning interest, but the interest you're earning can buy you less and less goods and services. So that's not that great. Wages can lag behind inflation. Wages, as we've seen in the past session on unemployment, can be quite sticky. And wages have a hard time going down, but wages also can't go up a lot. We tend to not adjust wages a lot. Minimum wages are not adjusted all the time. And wages in general are not that fluid. They're not that flexible. So because we're only adjusting wages once or twice a year, and even less, because some wages are not indexed or connected to inflation, well, inflation will hurt us. The wages just don't keep up. If you're a retiree receiving a fixed pension, many pensions are not adjusted appropriately for inflation. So you may have a pension that gives you a certain amount of money every year, but if prices are rising and you're retired and you have a fixed pension every year or every month, that's not good for you. And again, you will hurt. And lastly, if you pay income taxes, in most countries where income taxes exist, the marginal rate, the rate of taxation you pay on a certain amount of money, or the next 1,000 euros or next 100 euros, that marginal rate is fixed in brackets. So it increases as your income increases. And so you could actually, with raising inflation, your wages will go up. But as the wages go up with inflation, you'll be pushed into a higher tax rate if the rates are not adjusted for inflation. And this is all dependent upon the system that exists in the country. So that concludes the session on inflation. I hope you've learned a little bit about how inflation is measured, learned a little bit about the challenges of high inflation, learned a little bit about why inflation is not always measuring everything we need to measure, and sometimes it overmeasures the impact of rising prices. So I hope you've learned a little bit of that. Take a look at the exercise that I've placed below this video, and we'll discuss that during the live session coming up. And feel free to send me any questions you may have or comments about inflation. And I look forward to seeing you all very, very, very soon. Please be healthy, take care, and I wish you all the best.